Exhaustion anchored Bathsheba Gallagher's 240-pound frame as she trudged away from a grueling double shift at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. Her swollen feet yearned for a hot bath, but a wet, violent choking sound from a pitch-black Chicago alleyway stopped her dead. Every survival instinct screamed at her to keep walking. Yet her nurse's oath forced her heavy boots into the shadows. Dropping her bag beside an elegantly dressed, convulsing elderly woman, Bathsheba had no idea this single act of mercy would violently drag her quiet, invisible existence straight into the ruthless, gilded cage of the city's deadliest mafia kingpin. Cold October wind whipped through the concrete canyons of downtown Chicago, biting at Bathsheba's exposed cheeks. She pulled her oversized woolen coat tighter around her generous frame, her breath visible in the frosty air. Bathsheba, known as Bat to her colleagues, was a woman who took up space both physically and emotionally. She was fat, a reality she had long ago accepted and navigated with a mix of self-deprecating humor and unyielding competence. While her weight made the grueling physical demands of nursing a daily battle against backaches and joint pain, it also gave her a soft maternal presence that terrified pediatric patients and anxious elders alike found immensely comforting. Tonight, however, she was running on fumes. She had just finished a brutal double shift in the ER, assisting Dr. Samuel Harris with a relentless influx of trauma cases. As she bypassed the well-lit main avenue for a quicker, albeit darker, shortcut down Elm Street, her mind was solely focused on the leftover lasagna waiting in her fridge. A sharp, unnatural sound broke her reverie. It was a wet, rattling wheeze, followed by the distinct thud of a body hitting wet asphalt behind a row of industrial dumpsters. Bat froze. Every self-preservation instinct screamed at her to keep walking. This was not a safe neighborhood, but the oath she had taken was carved into her bones. Dropping her heavy tote bag, she hurried into the gloom, using her smartphone flashlight to pierce the darkness. There, crumpled against the brick wall like a discarded rag doll, was an elderly woman. She wore an elegant, though currently dirt-stained, charcoal wool coat that looked entirely out of place in the grime. The woman's silver hair was plastered to her forehead with cold sweat, and her hands clawed desperately at her own throat. Ma'am, can you hear me?" "I'm a nurse," Bat shouted, dropping to her knees beside the woman. The hard concrete sent a jolt of pain up Bat's heavy thighs, but she ignored it, immediately assessing the situation. The woman's lips were tinted a terrifying shade of cyanotic blue. Her eyes were rolled back, only the whites visible, and a thin line of white foam bubbled at the corner of her mouth. This wasn't a standard myocardial infarction. The erratic, thrashing movements in the pinpoint pupils suggested something far more sinister, a severe toxicological reaction. Bat's hands flew over the woman, checking her pulse. It was thready, racing a mile a minute before dropping dangerously low. "Hey, stay with me," Bat commanded, her voice dropping an octave into the authoritative tone she used in the trauma bay. She fumbled for her phone, dialing 911 on speaker, screaming her location and a suspected poisoning code to the dispatcher. Suddenly, the woman convulsed, a violent seizure that threatened to crack her head against the brick wall. Bat didn't hesitate. She threw her own substantial body weight forward, using her soft, heavy torso to pin the frail woman down, protecting her skull with her hands. The physical exertion was immense. Sweat batted on Bat's forehead as she wrestled to keep the stranger safe from her own failing nervous system. "Come on, breathe. Just breathe," Bat chanted, turning the woman onto her side as the seizure subsided, clearing her airway of the foam. The woman's breathing stopped completely. "Damn it," Bat hissed. She rolled the woman flat, locked her hands over the delicate sternum and began chest compressions. Pushing down on the chest of an elderly person was always terrifying. The sickening crunch of ribs was a common occupational hazard, but Bat used her upper body strength and weight to deliver perfect, rhythmic pumps. 1, 2, 3, 4. She poured every ounce of her remaining energy into keeping the blood flowing to the stranger's brain. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Bat's arms burned, her lungs screaming for oxygen, but she refused to stop. The wail of an approaching ambulance finally cut through the night. Paramedics burst into the alley, illuminating the scene with harsh halogen flashlights. "I've got her," shouted Liam Jenkins, a paramedic Bat recognized. "Bat, what the hell are you doing out here?" "Suspected toxidrome, maybe an organophosphate or a heavy cardiac glycoside," Bat gasped, stepping back to let them take over, her chest heaving. She seized, then coded, "I've been doing compressions for 4 minutes." They loaded the woman onto the stretcher. Without asking, Bat hauled herself into the back of the ambulance. She wasn't about to let her patient die in transit. All the way to St. Jude's, Bat assisted Liam in pushing atropine and establishing an airway. By the time they smashed through the ER doors, the woman had a faint, stable rhythm. Dr. Aris met them at the bay, his eyebrows shooting up at the sight of Bat, disheveled and covered in alley grime. "Gallagher, I thought you went home." "Found her in the alley," Bat panted, leaning heavily against the nurse's station counter. "She needs a full top screen. Stat, someone tried to kill this woman." The next afternoon, Bathsheba arrived at the hospital 2 hours before her shift began. She hadn't been able to sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the elegant, dying woman in the alley. The patient had been registered as a Jane Doe. She carried no purse, no identification, and her tailored clothes bore no labels, which Bart found intensely odd. After changing into her navy blue scrubs, the largest size the hospital provided, which still clung a bit too tightly to her hips, Bat waddled up to the ICU on the 4th floor. Jane Doe was in room 42012. The rhythmic beep of the cardiac monitor was a soothing contrast to the chaos of the previous night. Bat slipped into the room. The woman looked frail, connected to a myriad of IV lines and monitors, but the terrifying blue pallor was gone, replaced by a pale, aristocratic complexion. To Bat's surprise, the woman's dark, intelligent eyes fluttered open. They locked onto Bat, sharp and completely lucid. "You!" the woman rasped, her voice dry as parchment, carrying a faint, unidentifiable European accent. Bat moved closer, pouring a small cup of water with a sponge swab. "Yes, it's me. Bathsheba. I'm a nurse here. How are you feeling, ma'am?" The woman allowed Bat to moisten her lips. "Like I was trampled by a very large, very determined bat," she whispered, a ghost of a smile playing on her lips. Bat flushed, her hand subconsciously dropping to her stomach. I had to pin you during your seizure. I apologize if I bruised you." Not exactly light. The woman reached out, her cool, thin fingers wrapping around Bat's thick wrist with surprising strength. "Do not apologize for the space you take up, Bathsheba. Your weight, your strength, it kept me tethered to this earth. You saved my life." Bat felt a lump form in her throat. She was so used to backhanded compliments or outright judgments from patients about her size. To hear this elegant stranger speak to her with such raw gratitude was overwhelming. "Do you remember your name?" Bat asked softly. "Or what happened? The doctors found traces of a synthesized aconite derivative in your system. You were poisoned." The woman's eyes hardened, a flash of something cold and dangerous crossing her features before she masked it. "My name is Rosa, and as for what happened, my memory is clouded. Old age, perhaps." Bat wasn't stupid. She knew a lie when she heard one, but she didn't press. Over the next 2 days, Bart spent every spare minute of her breaks in room 412 too. She discovered Rosa had a razor-sharp wit and an immense love for classical music. Dad even brought in some homemade baked ziti in a Tupperware container, ignoring hospital dietary protocols because Rosa complained the hospital broth tasted like dishwater boiled with pennies. On the evening of the third day, the atmosphere in the hospital shifted. Bat was at the nurse's station reviewing charts when she noticed a man in medical scrubs walking down the ICU corridor. He was tall, well-built, and wore a surgical mask. But something was wrong. His posture was too rigid, his boots were heavy tactical gear, not standard nursing clogs, and he wasn't checking the room numbers. He was making a beeline directly for room 412. A cold prickle of dread washed over Bat. She dropped her cutboard and moved. Despite her size, adrenaline fueled her, making her surprisingly fast. She reached the doorway just as the man pulled a syringe with a sickeningly long needle from his pocket and stepped toward Rosa, who was fast asleep. "Hey, what are you doing?" Bat shouted, her voice booming through the quiet ward. The man spun around, his eyes wide above the mask. He lunged toward the IV line. Bat didn't think, she acted. She charged into the room like a linebacker. She threw her entire 240 pounds directly at the man. The impact was brutal. The air rushed out of the assassin's lungs as Bat slammed him against the medical equipment cart, sending stainless steel trays and instruments crashing to the floor with a deafening clatter. The man swore viciously, striking Bat across the jaw with the back of his hand. Pain exploded in her face, tasting of copper, but she didn't let go. She grabbed his wrist, the one holding the syringe, with both hands, twisting it upward with all her might. She leveraged her heavy center of gravity, dragging him down toward the linoleum floor. Security, code gray. ICU 412. Bat screamed at the top of her lungs, wrestling desperately with the intruder. The man realized he was losing precious seconds. He kicked out, his heavy boot catching Bat in the knee. She cried out, her leg buckling under her immense weight, but she managed to violently yank his arm, causing the syringe to fly across the room and shatter against the wall. Hearing the pounding footsteps of hospital security approaching, the assassin violently shoved Bat aside. She crashed into the wall, sliding to the floor, breathless and bruised. The man sprinted out the door, disappearing down the emergency stairwell, just as two security guards burst into the corridor. Bat scrambled to her knees, ignoring her throbbing jaw and screaming knee, pulling herself up to the bed. Rosa was awake now, staring at the shattered syringe on the floor, her expression unreadable, though her hands trembled slightly. "Are you okay?" Bat gasped, checking Rosa's monitors. Rosa looked at the chubby, disheveled nurse, a bloody split lip marring her kind face. "You fought for me," Rosa whispered, o'erlacing her tone. Again. "Well," Bat panted, trying to force a reassuring smile. "I told you I'm a very determined batter." The following morning, St. Jude's Medical Center ceased to function as a normal hospital. Bat arrived with an ice pack pressed to her swollen cheek and a slight limp. She barely made it through the sliding glass doors before she realized something was terribly wrong. 6 black, armored SUVs were parked haphazardly in the ambulance bay, engines idling. Inside the lobby, the usual morning bustle had been replaced by a suffocating silence. Men in immaculate dark tailored suits were stationed at every exit, near the elevators and down the corridors. They weren't police. They had the cold, dead-eyed look of predators surveying a watering hole. Dr. Dashid Aris was standing near the front desk, looking pale and sweating profusely, talking to a man who commanded the room simply by standing in it. The man had broad shoulders, raven black hair slicked back perfectly, and wore a bespoke charcoal suit that screamed old money and absolute power. His profile was sharp, aristocratic, and unyielding. Bat hobbled forward, her protective instincts flaring. She pushed past a large man who tried to block her path. "Excuse me, I work here. Move." The large man blared but stepped aside when the man in the charcoal suit turned around. Grayson Valenti possessed eyes as cold and dark as the Chicago River in winter. As the current don of the Valenti crime family, he was accustomed to people shrinking away from him, trembling in his presence. When he turned his gaze on Bathsheba Gallagher, a fat, battered nurse holding a cheap ice pack, he expected the same fearful deference. He didn't get it. "Who is this?" Grayson demanded, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that vibrated through the floorboards. That is Nurse Gallagher, Doctor." Aris stammered. "She's the one who—" "I'm the one who's trying to get to my patient," Bat interrupted, glaring right back at Grayson. She didn't know who this man was, but she knew he was disrupting her hospital. "And unless you have medical clearance, you and your private security detail need to clear the hallways. This is a hospital, not a nightclub." A collective gasp echoed from the nurses behind the desk. Grayson's right-hand man, a scarred enforcer named Silvio, reached inside his jacket. Grayson held up a single-gloved hand. Silvio froze. Grayson took a slow, deliberate step toward Bat. He looked her up and down, taking in her stained sneakers, the tight scrubs that highlighted her heavy hips, the split lip, and the fierce protective fire in her hazel eyes. "You are the woman who found my mother," Grayson stated. It wasn't a question. Bat blinked. "Your mother, Jane Doe." "Rosa is your mother?" "Rosa Valenti," Grayson corrected, stepping into her personal space. He loomed over her, a physical threat wrapped in expensive Italian wool. "My men scoured the city when she went missing from her townhouse. I am told she was poisoned. I am also told an attempt was made on her life in the ICU last night." Grayson reached out, surprisingly gentle, and tilted Bat's chin up with his thumb to inspect her split lip and bruised cheek. Bat stiffened, but didn't back down. "And I am told," Grayson continued, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper meant only for her, "that a nurse threw herself into a professional hitman to save her, using nothing but her bare hands." "I did my job," Bat said, her voice shaking slightly, not from fear, but from the intense, suffocating energy radiating off him. "Someone had to stop him." Grayson dropped his hand. He turned to Dr. Aris. "My mother is leaving this facility now. I have a private trauma suite set up at my estate. Mr. Valenti, she is not stable for transport, Doctor." Aris began. "She's not safe here," Grayson snapped, the facade of civility cracking to reveal the ruthless boss beneath. "Your security's a joke. She leaves with me." He turned his dark gaze back to Bat. "You, Gallagher, you are coming too." Bat's jaw dropped. "Excuse me." "No, I'm not. I have a job here. I have a life. You can't just abduct a registered nurse." Grayson stepped closer until the tips of his expensive leather shoes touched her scuffed sneakers. He leaned down, his lips mere inches from her ear. He smelled of cedarwood, dark espresso, and something undeniably dangerous. "My mother refuses to let any of my private medical staff touch her. She is demanding the determined Bart who saved her life," Grayson murmured, a hint of dark amusement lacing his tone. "You saved her twice, Bathsheba. In my world, that creates a debt, but it also puts a target on your back. Whoever tried to kill her knows your face now. They know you interfered." Bat felt all the blood drain from her face. The reality of what she had stumbled into hit her like a freight train. "You will pack your things," Grayson ordered, stepping back, his mask of cold authority firmly back in place. "You will be compensated 100 times your current salary. But you will come to my home. You will care for my mother, and you will stay alive. Do we understand each other?" Bat looked around. The hospital staff was silent, terrified. She looked at the heavy-set men guarding the doors. She thought of Rosa, frail but fiery, surrounded by this world of violence. And despite the sheer terror gripping her heart, Bathsheba Gallagher nodded. "Fine," Bat said, squaring her heavy shoulders. "But I need my medical bag. And if you think you can boss me around in my own sick room, Mr. Valenti, you're in for a rude awakening." A genuine, slow smile spread across Grayson Valenti's face, completely transforming his harsh features into something devastatingly handsome. "I look forward to it, Nurse Gallagher." Gravel crunched beneath the massive, bulletproof tires of the armored Maybach as the convoy passed through towering wrought-iron gates. Bathsheba pressed her face against the tinted window, her wide hazel eyes taking in the sprawling 40-acre estate, nestled deep within the affluent enclave of Highland Park, right on the edge of Lake Michigan. The Valenti compound was less of a home and more of the heavily fortified medieval castle wearing the disguise of a modern, multi-million-dollar architectural marvel. Armed men in tactical gear patrolled the manicured lawns alongside Dobermans, their silhouettes stark against the graying afternoon sky. Inside the mansion, the display of wealth was dizzying. Bat's scuffed nursing sneakers squeaked against imported Carrara marble floors. Above them hung a cascading baccarat crystal chandelier that probably cost more than her entire nursing education at Loyola University. Raisin Valenti led the way, his long, purposeful strides forcing Bat to hustle to keep up, her heavy thighs chafing slightly beneath her scrubs. "We have converted the East Wing Solarium into a fully functioning intensive care unit," Grayson announced, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. He didn't look back to see if she was following. He merely expected her to be there. All equipment was procured this morning from a private medical supply firm in Zurich. "Whatever you require, my men will acquire it." Bat stepped into the makeshift hospital room and stopped dead in her tracks. It was breathtaking. Floor-to-ceiling bulletproof glass overlooked the turbulent waters of Lake Michigan. In the center of the room sat a state-of-the-art Hillrom hospital bed, flanked by top-tier cardiac monitors, a portable ultrasound machine, and an Alarus infusion pump system. Rosa Valenti rested against a pile of plush, custom monogrammed fret pillows, looking significantly better than she had in the sterile, chaotic environment of St. Jude's. Standing beside the bed was a slender, sharp-featured man holding a silver tray. He wore a tailored vest and a perfectly knotted silk tie. "Ah, the formidable nurse arrives," Rosa croaked, a genuine, albeit weak, smile gracing her lined face. "Bathsheba, this is Lorenzo. He has been trying to force-feed me pureed pheasant for the last hour. Please tell him to throw it into the lake. Nutritional intake is vital for cellular regeneration, Signora," Lorenzo murmured, his tone respectful but firm. Bat dropped her heavy medical bag onto a nearby crushed velvet armchair. She rolled up her sleeves, her plump, dimpled forearms exposed, and shifted immediately into her professional persona. The opulent surroundings faded. This was her territory now. "Lorenzo, is it?" Bat asked, walking over to the bedside and checking Rosa's IV drip rate. "Unless that pheasant has a sodium content of less than 140 milligrams and is blended with a clear liquid to prevent aspiration, it goes back to the kitchen. Her gastrointestinal tract just survived a massive toxicological shock. We are starting with clear broths, moving to full liquids tomorrow. Understand?" Lorenzo blinked, clearly unaccustomed to being commanded by anyone other than Grayson. He looked to his boss. Grayson leaned against the mahogany doorframe, his dark, dangerous eyes fixed entirely on Bat. He offered a single, curt nod. "As the nurse instructs," Grayson said, a faint trace of amusement coloring his low baritone. Over the next 48 hours, Bat established a strict, unyielding routine. She was a woman who commanded space, not just with her physical size, but with her absolute medical authority. She barred Grayson's heavily armed enforcers from entering the room without full scrub-in protocols. When Grayson's terrifying right-hand man, Silvio, tried to enter wearing his dusty leather jacket to deliver a report, Bat physically blocked the doorway with her wide hips. "Sterile environment, Silvio," Bat reprimanded, pointing a stern finger at the towering mobster. "I don't care how many guns you have strapped to your ankles. You are a walking fomite. Back up." From down the hall, Grayson had watched the exchange, a low chuckle rumbling in his chest. Women in Grayson's world were typically two things: terrified of him or desperately trying to seduce him by conforming to impossible, starved standards of Batuti. But Shiva Gallagher was neither. She was soft, heavy, fiercely protective, and completely unimpressed by his Mafia empire. On her third night at the estate, Bart was sitting in the dimly lit solarium, charting Rosa's vitals on an iPad. The older woman was finally sleeping peacefully. A floorboard creaked, and Bat looked up to see Grayson entering the room. He had discarded his suit jacket and tie. His white dress shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, revealing the dark ink of a tattoo creeping up his muscular neck. He moved silently, a predator in his natural habitat, and sank into the velvet armchair opposite Bat. He poured 2 fingers of amber liquid from a crystal decanter into a lowball glass. "You look exhausted, Bathsheba," Grayson noted, his dark eyes tracing the heavy bags under her eyes and the exhaustion etched into her round, pretty face. "I'm fine," Bat replied automatically, self-consciously tugging her oversized scrub top down over her stomach. "Your mother's cardiac enzymes are normalizing. The aconite derivative is almost completely flushed from her system. You keep pulling at your clothes when I look at you," Grayson observed softly, taking a slow sip of his Macallan whiskey. It wasn't a criticism. It was an intense clinical observation. Bat felt a hot flush creep up her thick neck. "I'm just adjusting. I know I'm not exactly the type of woman you usually have wandering around your mansion, Mr. Valenti." Grayson set his glass down. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "And what type of woman is that? Thin, glamorous, the kind who wears Prada instead of Cherokee scrubs," Bat muttered, instantly regretting her lack of filter. Fatigue was making her reckless. Grayson stood up slowly, closing the distance between them. He stopped right in front of her chair. Bat had to crane her neck to look up at him. He reached out, his large, calloused hand gently brushing a stray lock of brown hair behind her ear. His knuckles grazed her soft, full cheek. "Prada does not throw itself into the line of fire to save a dying woman," Grayson said, his voice a low, hypnotic rumble. "Glamour does not wrestle professional assassins to the ground. You have more courage in your little finger than any of the hollow socialites who frequent this world. Never apologize to me for the space you inhabit, Bathsheba. I find every inch of it magnificent." That's breath hitched in her throat, her heart hammered against her ribs, completely unaccustomed to this kind of predatory, intense male attention. Before she could formulate a response, the steady, rhythmic beeping of Rosa's cardiac monitor abruptly spiked into a frantic, high-pitched alarm. The romantic tension shattered instantly. Bat shoved past Grayson, her heavy frame moving with explosive speed. Rosa was thrashing in the bed, gasping for air, her hands clawing at her chest. "Code Blue, get the crash cart!" Bat screamed, hitting the emergency call button she had insisted Grayson install. Chaos erupted in the gilded cage. Silvio and 2 other guards burst into the room, followed closely by Dr. Bear. Aris, whom Grayson had placed on a lavish retainer to remain on the estate grounds. Her heart rate is 188 and climbing, Detach! Bat shouted over the deafening alarm, grabbing the defibrillator paddles. Dr. Aris, push 1 milligram of efferentastat. Grayson stood paralyzed in the corner, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles were white. The ruthless don of the Chicago underworld was utterly powerless as he watched his mother slip away again. That charged the paddles. Clear! Oh. The electrical shock jolted Rosa's frail body off the mattress. Bat stared at the monitor. Nothing. Just erratic, deadly waves. Charged to 200. Clear. Another violent jolt. For 3 agonizing seconds, the monitor flatlined. Then, miraculously, a steady, rhythmic beep. Beep. Beep resumed. Sinus rhythm. Bat collapsed back against the medical cart, her broad chest heaving, sweat dripping down her face. Dr. Aris quickly adjusted the oxygen flow and checked Rosa's pupils. She stabilized, Dr. Aris breathed, wiping his forehead. Another delayed reaction to the aconite, a secondary wave of toxicity. Bat frowned, her sharp medical mind cutting through the adrenaline. She looked at Rosa, then at the IV bags hanging on the stainless steel pole. She walked over, her eyes narrowing as she inspected the ports. No, Bat said, her voice eerily calm. Aconite doesn't work in delayed explosive waves like this after 3 days of constant flashing. It degrades. This was acute. This was new. Grayson stepped forward, the air around him dropping 10 degrees. What are you saying, Batsheva? Bat turned to face the most dangerous man in Chicago. I'm saying someone poisoned her again, tonight. Under your roof, a suffocating silence fell over the room. Silvio's hand drifted instinctively to the holster beneath his jacket. Grayson's eyes darted around the room, assessing every face, every shadow. Nobody enters this room without my clearance, Grayson growled, his voice a lethal whisper. Only you, the doctor, Lorenzo, and my personal guards. I need to see everything she ingested today, Bat demanded, ignoring the terrifying shift in Grayson's demeanor. Every medication, every drop of water, every piece of food. For the next 4 hours, the multi-million-dollar kitchen became a forensic laboratory. Bat, with Grayson hovering like a vengeful shadow at her shoulder, tore through the pantry. She examined the sealed bottles of Aquapana water, the specially delivered organic produce, and the locked medical cabinet. We are missing something, Bat muttered, chewing nervously on her thumb. She paced the length of the marble island, her heavy footsteps the only sound in the cavernous room. The IV bags were sealed. The medications are prepackaged. It has to be something seemingly innocuous, something only an old woman recovering from trauma would ask for. She stopped pacing. She looked at Grayson, her eyes wide. Tea. When I was chart-checking earlier, Lorenzo brought her a cup of chamomile tea. She said it tasted bitter, but she drank it to soothe her throat. Grayson snapped his fingers. Silvio immediately produced the fine porcelain teacup from a tray near the sink. A few drops of dark amber liquid remained at the bottom. Bat grabbed a portable touchscreen kit from her bag. She carefully extracted a single drop of the leftover tea and applied it to the testing strip. The strip required a reagent for common heavy metals and botanical toxins. She applied the chemical drops and waited. 1 minute. 2 minutes. The strip aggressively turned a vibrant, unmistakable shade of purple. The Detalis, Bat whispered, her blood running cold. Foxglove extract, and it's a cardiac glycoside. In small doses, it treats heart failure. In massive, concentrated doses, it induces a fatal arrhythmia. It mimics a natural heart attack. Grayson stared at the purple strip. The betrayal was absolute. The enemy wasn't an outside rival family like the Novaks. The enemy was inside his walls. Lorenzo, Grayson said. The name tasted like ash. He's been with your family for 20 years, Silvio interjected. his scarred face twisting in disbelief. "He practically raised you when your father died, boss. Why would he do this? Because a 20-year loyalty is expensive to buy out, but not impossible," Grayson said, his voice completely devoid of emotion. "Silvio, bring him to the soundproof cellar. Do not kill him. I need to know who paid him." Silvio nodded grimly and vanished from the kitchen. Grayson turned to Bat. The sheer violence radiating from him was palpable, yet he didn't direct a drop of it toward her. Instead, he stepped close, reaching out to grip her thick, soft shoulders. His hands were shaking slightly, the only physical tell of the betrayal tearing him apart. "You saved her again," Grayson whispered, resting his forehead gently against hers. It was an incredibly intimate, vulnerable gesture from a man who showed no weakness to the world. "If you hadn't been here, if I had hired some standard private nurse who didn't care enough to look closer, my mother would be dead." Bat's hands tentatively came up to rest on his solid, muscular chest. She could feel the rapid, furious bat of his heart through the expensive cotton of his shirt. "Grayson," she breathed, using his first name for the first time. "I'm just doing my job." "No," Grayson corrected fiercely, pulling back slightly to look into her hazel eyes. "You are doing far more than that. You have waged a war for my family, Bathsheba Gallagher, and I protect those who fight for me." Before Bat could process his words, a muffled gunshot echoed from deep beneath the mansion floors. Grayson's jaw tightened. "Stay here," he commanded softly, the Mafia boss seamlessly returning to the forefront. "Lock the kitchen doors. Do not let anyone in but me." As Grayson disappeared down the dark hallway leading to the basement stairs, Bat realized with terrifying clarity that she was no longer just a bystander caught in the crossfire. She was the anchor holding a king to his humanity, and she was plunging headfirst into a dark, violent world from which she might never escape. Silence descended upon the opulent kitchen, heavy and suffocating. Bathsheba stood frozen near the massive sub-zero refrigerator, her reflection staring back at her in the polished stainless steel. She saw a woman who looked entirely out of place, a 240-pound ER nurse with a messy bun, wearing cheap scrubs in a kitchen that likely cost more than a small island. Yet beneath the soft, dimpled curves of her face and the heavy set of her shoulders, there was a resolute fire. She was terrified, yes, but she was also incredibly angry. Someone had used her patient's vulnerability to strike a lethal blow. 10 minutes later, the heavy oak doors swung open. Grayson emerged from the shadows of the corridor. He looked immaculate, save for a single stark drop of crimson blood staining the crisp white cuff of his Tom Ford dress shirt. His face was a mask of chiseled granite, completely devoid of the tender vulnerability he had shown her just moments before. "Lorenzo sang," Grayson stated, his voice devoid of any inflection. He walked to the marble island and poured himself a glass of water from the tap, downing it in one smooth motion. He didn't even require much persuasion. The gunshot you heard was Silvio executing a warning shot into the concrete floor. Lorenzo's loyalty was bought for $5 million and a one-way ticket to a non-extradition country. "Who paid him?" Bat asked, her voice steady despite the trembling in her thick fingers. Grayson's jaw locked. "My father's brother, Domenico Valenti. He was exiled to Sicily a decade ago for attempting to traffic narcotics through our Union shipments, something my father strictly forbade. He has returned, it seems, and he wants the seat of the Don. My mother was the only remaining thread holding the old guard's loyalty entirely to me. With her dead, Domenico believed he could force a vote of no confidence." Bat sank onto a plush leather bar stool, the plush material yielding to her heavy frame. "Your own uncle, Grayson, that's horrific." "It is the reality of our bloodline," Grayson replied, walking over to her. He didn't hesitate. He closed the distance and placed his large hands on her waist, his long fingers splaying over the soft, wide curve of her hips. The touch sent a jolt of electricity straight to Bat's core. But Domenico underestimated two things. He underestimated my capacity for absolute retaliation, and he underestimated you, Bathsheba. Before Bat could process the heat radiating from his touch, a shrill, deafening klaxon shattered the quiet of the mansion. The baccarat crystal chandelier above them vibrated with the sound. The main lights immediately snapped off, plunging the estate into darkness for 3 terrifying seconds before the dull red glow of emergency backup lights flickered to life. Silvio burst into the kitchen, a customized Heckler & Koch MP5 submachine gun already strapped to his broad chest. "Boss, the perimeter is breached. 3 heavily armored SUVs just crashed the north gates. They disabled the main breaker and the external surveillance. We have visual on at least 15 men moving on the east wing." Grayson's eyes went completely black. The east wing. The solarium. "They aren't waiting for the poison to finish the job," Grayson snarled, pulling a sleek, matte black Glock 19 from a holster at his lower back. "They came to execute her themselves." Silvio locked down the central corridor. "I want a kill box established in the grand foyer. Grayson, your mother." Bat gasped, her maternal instincts completely overriding her fear. "She's hooked up to the Alaris pump and the heavy monitors. We have to move her, but she can't walk." "We take her to the panic room beneath the library," Grayson ordered, his grip on Bat's waist tightening for a fraction of a second before he let go. "Move, Bathsheba. Keep your head down." Bat didn't need to be told twice. She sprinted down the red-lit hallway, her heavy nursing sneakers pounding against the imported rugs. Her lungs burned, and her thick thighs chafed with the exertion, but she pushed her body to its absolute limits. They burst into the makeshift ICU. Rosa was awake, her dark eyes wide with alarm, though she remained eerily calm. The distant staccato pop of gunfire echoed from the front of the estate. The siege had begun. "Signora, we are moving you," Bat announced in her most authoritative trauma ward voice. She immediately began disconnecting the non-essential monitors, her fingers flying over the delicate wiring. "Domenico?" Rosa guessed, her voice raspy. Grayson nodded curtly as he checked the magazine of his weapon. "Yes, Mama. We are going to the vault." "The portable oxygen tank," Bat instructed, grabbing a heavy green steel cylinder from the corner. "Grayson, you have to carry this. I will support her weight. The IV line stays in." Grayson slung the heavy oxygen tank over his shoulder as easily as if it were a gym bag. Together he and Bat hoisted Rosa from the bed. Bat positioned herself on Rosa's weaker side, wrapping her thick, sturdy arm around the frail woman's waist, essentially acting as a human crutch. Rosa leaned heavily into Bat's soft side, grateful for the sturdy, unyielding support of the larger woman. They moved painfully slowly down the east corridor. The sound of gunfire grew louder, transforming from distant pops into deafening, echoing blasts of violence. The smell of cordite and pulverized drywall began to filter through the expensive HVAC system. "Through the study," Grayson commanded, gesturing with his gun toward a set of heavy mahogany doors. Just as they crossed the threshold into the sprawling 2-story library, the large bay windows overlooking the gardens shattered inward in an explosion of glass and moonlight. 2 men dressed in black tactical gear vaulted into the room, their assault rifles raised. Grayson reacted with terrifying lethal precision. He shoved Bat and his mother behind a massive leather Chesterfield sofa and fired 3 rapid shots. The first man dropped instantly, a bullet catching him squarely in the throat. But the second man rolled, utilizing the cover of a solid oak reading desk. He blind-fired a burst of automatic rounds toward the sofa. The bullets tore through the leather and horsehair stuffing, missing Bat's head by mere inches. She screamed, throwing her heavy body over Rosa, using her expansive back and thick arms as a fleshy shield to protect the Mafia matriarch. "Grayson!" Rosa cried out. Grayson was pinned down behind a marble bust of Marcus Aurelius, returning fire, but his angle was blocked. The assassin, realizing Grayson was temporarily neutralized, abandoned the desk and began to flank them, advancing directly toward the sofa where Bat and Rosa were huddled. Bat could hear the heavy crunch of his boots on the broken glass. Panic threatened to consume her, but the fierce territorial anger she had felt in the kitchen flared to life again. She was a nurse. She protected life. She was not going to let this masked thug execute an old woman under her watch. Bat's eyes darted frantically around her immediate vicinity. Her medical bag was in the other room. She had nothing. Then she saw it. The heavy green steel portable oxygen tank Grayson had dropped when he pushed them to the floor. It lay just 2 feet away. The assassin stepped around the edge of the sofa, his rifle aimed down at them. With a guttural roar, Bat didn't cower. She exploded upward from the floor. She utilized every single ounce of her 240 pounds, driving her powerful, thick legs into the ground. She lunged forward, grabbing the neck of the heavy oxygen tank with both hands, and swung it like a medieval club with all her might. The solid steel cylinder connected with the side of the assassin's knee, with a sickening, wet crunch. The man howled in agony, his legs snapping backward at an unnatural angle. He collapsed to the floor, his rifle clattering across the hardwood. Before he could reach for the sidearm holstered at his hip, Grayson was there. The Don stood over the writhing assassin, his face an emotionless mask of pure death, and pulled the trigger once. The library fell dead silent, save for the ringing in Bat's ears and her own ragged, heavy breathing. Grayson slowly lowered his weapon. He looked at the shattered window, the blood pooling on his expensive Persian rug, and then his dark eyes fixed entirely on Bathsheba. She was on her knees, her chest heaving, clutching the heavy oxygen tank to her chest like a lifeline. Her messy bun had fallen out, her brown hair cascading over her broad shoulders. She looked magnificent. She looked like a Valkyrie. "Are you hit?" Grayson demanded, his voice thick with an emotion that sounded dangerously close to panic. He dropped to his knees in front of her, his hands frantically scanning her thick arms, her torso, checking her for bullet wounds. "No!" Bat gasped, dropping the tank and grabbing his wrists to stop his frantic searching. "I'm okay. I'm fat, and I'm out of breath, and I think I pulled a hamstring." Grayson let out a ragged breath that was half laugh, half sob. He pulled her forward, burying his face in the crook of her soft, fleshy neck. "You absolute magnificent terror," he murmured against her skin. "You fought for us again." The sun rose over Lake Michigan, casting a brilliant, bloody orange glow through the shattered windows of the Valenti estate. The siege had lasted just under 40 minutes. Domenico's men, demoralized by the loss of their breach team and hopelessly outgunned by Silvio's heavily fortified security detail, had ultimately surrendered or fled. By 6 a.m., the estate was swarming with cleaners, professionals who specialized in making bodies and bullet holes disappear before the Highland Park police even thought to send a patrol car. Bat sat in the massive, untouched formal dining room, a mug of black coffee clutched in her hands. She had patched up 3 of Grayson's guards, utilizing her trauma skills to extract bullets and suture lacerations right there on the dining room table. She was exhausted down to her marrow. Her scrubs were stained with blood and dirt, and her muscles screamed in protest with every movement. Grayson walked into the room. He had finally changed out of his blood-stained shirt, now wearing a simple, dark cashmere sweater that stretched taut across his broad chest. He carried an iPad, handing it to Silvio, who nodded and left the room, leaving the two of them alone. Grayson pulled out the chair next to Bat and sat down. He didn't speak immediately, he just looked at her. "How is she?" Bat finally asked, breaking the silence. "Dr. Aris is with her. She is resting comfortably in the reinforced suite," Grayson replied softly. "Her heart rhythm is perfect. She asked for you, but I told her the determined Bartra needed to hibernate for a few hours." Bat let out a tired chuckle, tracing the rim of her coffee mug. "I guess my employment contract just got a lot more complicated, huh? Do I need to learn how to shoot a gun now, or is swinging heavy medical equipment my designated combat role?" Grayson smiled, a genuine warm expression that reached his dark eyes. He reached out and gently covered her hand with his. "There will be no more combat for you, Bathsheba," Grayson promised, his tone turning fiercely serious. "Domenico was found dead in his warehouse in the Fulton Market District an hour ago. Silvio handled it personally. The threat is extinguished. My family is secure." Bat swallowed hard. The casual mention of murder should have sent her running for the hills. But sitting here, feeling the warm, calloused weight of Grayson's hand on hers, she realized she had crossed a threshold. She had seen the absolute worst of this world, but she had also seen the fierce loyalty and the raw, protective love this man harbored for his family. "So, what happens now?" Bat asked softly, looking down at their joined hands. "Do I go back to St. Jude's? Back to double shifts and microwave lasagna?" Grayson's grip tightened. "Is that what you want?" "I don't know," Bat admitted, her hazel eyes meeting his dark ones. "I know I don't belong in a baccarat chandeliered mansion. I'm a curvy, loud, messy nurse from the South Side. I don't fit into this pristine, terrifying world of yours, Grayson." Grayson stood up, pulling Bat up with him. He didn't let go of her hands. He stepped into her space, his towering frame casting a protective shadow over her. "You are right. You do not fit into my world," Grayson murmured, his voice a low, vibrating hum that made her toes curl. "You eclipse it. Every woman I have ever known has been a fragile, delicate ornament. You are a force of nature. You take up space, Bathsheba, and you fill every room you enter with light and strength and a fierce, unyielding compassion." He brought his hands up to cup her soft, full cheeks, his thumbs gently brushing the dark circles under her eyes. "I don't want you to go back to St. Jude's," Grayson confessed, his eyes searching hers. "I want to build a private clinic for you right here in Chicago. Fully funded. You can run it exactly how you see fit, treating whoever you want. But at night, you come home to me, to this estate, to my mother, to me." Bat's breath hitched. "Grayson, are you asking me to be your personal nurse, or are you asking me something else?" "I am asking you to be my partner," Grayson stated, leaning in until his lips were a breath away from hers. "I am asking you to be the queen of this family, because after tonight, there isn't a single man in my syndicate who wouldn't lay down his life for you. And there isn't a bat of my heart that doesn't belong to you." Tears pricked Bat's eyes. For her entire life, she had been made to feel like she was too much too heavy, too loud, too space-consuming. But here, in the arms of the most dangerous man in the city, she felt perfectly sized. She felt exactly like enough. "Okay," Bat whispered, her lips brushing against his. "Okay, but I'm still in charge of your mother's diet. No more pureed pheasant." Grayson laughed, a rich, joyous sound that echoed off the high ceilings before he captured her lips in a deep, consuming kiss.